Hello, my amazing friend. I hope you are doing well. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a girl who didn't wait for permission, a girl who didn't belong to royalty, a girl who didn't wear armor, a girl who didn't study war. But still, she walked straight into a battlefield, spoke like a commander, fought like a lion, and shook an entire kingdom with nothing but her faith, courage, and voice. Her name was Joan of Arc. She was just 17 years old. No money, no power. But she believed something stronger than fear, that God had chosen her to save France. And you know what? She did it. But this story is not just about war. It's about vision, fire, betrayal, and a young girl who became immortal. This is one of the most powerful true stories in history. And by the end, you will feel goosebumps in your soul. And as you listen to her story in simple English, your listening, vocabulary, and speaking will grow stronger too. So if you love learning through real stories, subscribe now and let's begin the journey of Joan of Arc. So get ready. Chapter 1. The Little Girl Who Spoke to Angels. Let's go back more than 600 years ago, to the cold countryside of France in a small village called Domremy. It was the year 1412, and in this tiny village, full of farmers and poor families, a baby girl was born. Her name was Jeanne d'Arc. In English, we say Joan of Arc. She was not born in a palace. She never saw a crown. She didn't even go to school. She couldn't read. She couldn't write. She was just a simple farm girl. Her father, Jacques d'Arc, was a farmer. Her mother, Isabelle, was a religious woman who taught Joan about God and kindness. They had cows, sheep, and chickens. They worked in the fields all day. Life was hard. But Joan, even as a child, was different. She didn't like to gossip. She didn't care about games. She spent hours just sitting alone, praying. Everyone noticed her kindness. If someone was hungry, she shared her food. If someone was cold, she gave her blanket. If someone was sick, she prayed for them. But something strange happened when Joan was around 13 years old. One day, while standing in the garden, she heard a voice, a soft, powerful voice that came from nowhere. She looked around. No one was there. The voice said, "Joan, you have been chosen by God. You will help save France." She was shocked. And then she saw a light. Inside the light, she saw a figure. She believed it was Saint Michael, the angel warrior. He said, "Have courage. God is with you." From that day, her life changed forever. The voices continued. More saints came in her visions. Saint Catherine, Saint Margaret. They all gave her the same message. Go. You must help the French prince become king. You must save your people. But wait. She was only 13. She had never left her village. She didn't know anything about war. She was just a little girl in a country full of violence. At that time, France was suffering. It was the middle of a terrible war. The 100 Years' War between France and England. The English army had taken over many parts of France. The French people were losing hope. The true Prince of France, Charles VII, was hiding. He was scared, weak, unsure. And Joan, this teenage girl from nowhere, she said, "God wants me to help Charles become king, and I must lead the army." Everyone thought she was crazy. A girl led an army? Impossible. But Joan didn't care. She had faith, not fear. She had a mission, not doubts. And she knew, I may be just a girl, but I am not alone. God is with me. At age 16, Joan made a bold decision. She left her village and went to the nearby city of Vaucouleurs. She asked to speak to the local commander, Sir Robert de Baudricourt. She said, "Please, take me to the prince. I must speak to him. God has commanded me." The commander laughed. He told her to go home. But Joan came again. And again. She never gave up. People began to notice something powerful in her eyes, a strange confidence, a light. Finally, after many tries, the commander said, "Fine, go to the prince. I will send you with guards. May God help you." And so, this farm girl, who could not read, who had no armor, no money, no power, began the journey that would make her a legend. She cut her hair, dressed like a soldier, rode a horse for the first time, and traveled over 300 miles to reach the royal court. Her mission had begun. When Joan finally reached the royal city, her journey did not become easier. In fact, this is where the real test began. She entered a world she had never seen before. Tall stone walls, guards with shining armor, rich nobles wearing expensive clothes, cold eyes full of doubt. This was the court of the French prince, Charles, the man who might become king one day, if France survived. And standing at the gate was Joan, a teenage girl, dust on her clothes, no title, no education, no power. But inside her chest, her heart was burning with certainty. The prince did not meet her openly. Instead, he decided to test her. When Joan entered the great hall, dozens of men were standing there. Nobles, commanders, church leaders. Among them stood one man dressed like a king. But that man was not Charles. The real Charles was hiding quietly among the crowd, wearing simple clothes, watching her carefully. This was a trap. If Joan was lying, if she was only pretending, she would fail. Joan looked around the room. She didn't panic. She didn't hesitate. Her eyes moved slowly. Then suddenly, she walked straight past the false king and stopped in front of the real one. She bowed and said calmly, "You are the Dauphin of France. God sent me to you." The room fell silent. Charles turned pale. No one had told her who he was. At that moment, doubt entered his heart, and fear left it. Charles took Joan into a private room. No guards, no nobles, just the prince and a village girl. What Joan said next was never fully recorded, but Charles later admitted, "She told me a secret that only God and I knew." That secret shook him. For the first time in years, Charles felt hope. Still, hope was dangerous. If this girl was wrong, she could destroy everything. So the church demanded an investigation. Joan was sent to the city of Poitiers. For weeks, priests and scholars questioned her. They asked her cruel questions. Are you sent by God or by the devil? Why would God choose a girl? Why should men follow you? Joan never shouted, never cried, never argued. She answered simply. When asked, "Do you think God loves the English?" she replied, "I do not know if God loves or hates them. I only know he wants them out of France." When they tried to trap her with religious tricks, she said, "If I am not sent by God, may he send me. If I am sent by God, may he keep me." Her words were clear, not educated, but full of truth. After long weeks, the church reached a decision. They could find nothing evil in her. And Charles made the boldest decision of his life. He gave her what no woman had ever been given, an army, not because she knew war, but because she gave people belief. Joan was given white armor, a horse, a banner, not a sword. On the banner were the words, Jesus, Maria. She said, "I will not kill. I will carry the banner. God will decide the rest." Soldiers laughed at first. A girl leading men into battle? But something strange happened. She didn't drink. She didn't swear. She prayed every night. She spoke with confidence, not arrogance. Slowly, laughter turned into respect. France was losing badly. The city of Orléans was surrounded by English forces. If Orléans fell, France would collapse. This was the final hope. Joan stood before the army and said, "Do not fear their weapons. Fear only losing faith. Follow me, and France will rise." She rode at the front. Arrows flew, men fell. Joan was not trained for war, but she moved like someone guided. At one point, an arrow struck her shoulder. She fell. The army froze. Was this the end? Joan stood back up, pulled the arrow out, lifted her banner again, and shouted, "Forward! The city is ours!" The soldiers charged, and for the first time in years, France won. The siege of Orléans was broken. Bells rang, people cried, soldiers knelt. A teenage girl had done what trained generals could not. News spread like fire across France. They didn't call her a girl anymore. They called her Joan of Arc, the maid, the messenger, the hope of France. But victories create enemies, and the higher you rise, the harder the fall. Chapter 2. The Crown, the Doubts, and the Growing Shadows. After the miracle of Orléans, something had changed in the hearts of the French people. For years, they had been living in fear, losing battles, losing cities, losing hope. And then suddenly, a teenage girl arrived from a farm. Not with books, not with a weapon, but with fire in her soul. She walked into the war like a flame in the dark, and now that flame had grown into a wildfire. People whispered her name with awe. La Pucelle, the maid. She was sent by heaven, and in the center of it all stood Joan, calm, focused, still not proud. She gave all credit to God, but she wasn't done. Not even close. Remember, Joan didn't come to win just one city. She came to save France. She had told Charles from the very beginning, "You must be crowned. You are God's chosen king. I will take you to Reims." Now this might sound simple, but it wasn't. Why? Because Reims, the sacred place where French kings were crowned, was deep inside enemy territory. The journey there was full of danger. Castles controlled by the English, powerful enemies, wild forests, and thousands of soldiers who would kill her without hesitation. And most of the nobles and generals, they still doubted her. They thought, "She's done her part. We've won Orléans. Now let the men take over." But Joan was not here to be a decoration. She had a mission, and nothing could stop her. She told Charles, "The crown belongs to you, but only God can place it on your head. Trust me, and we will go to Reims." It was summer, 1429. Joan rode at the head of the army, now a national symbol. Beside her was Charles, the prince who had once been afraid to fight. Behind them were thousands of men, inspired, hopeful, ready to risk everything. They passed through enemy towns. At each city gate, the people were nervous. Some cities were loyal to the English. Some didn't know what to believe. But when they saw Joan, in shining white armor, holding her banner, face glowing with purpose, something happened. The gates opened, not with war, but with faith. It was as if God was walking with her. Even the enemy soldiers began to flee without a fight. One by one, the cities opened their doors. No army had ever done this before. And finally, after weeks of marching, they reached Reims. The people welcomed them like heroes. The great cathedral, where generations of kings had been crowned, opened its doors. On July 17th, 1429, Charles was crowned King Charles VII of France. The image was unforgettable. In the center of the cathedral stood the new king, but beside him, holding her banner, stood Joan. She did not smile for herself. She didn't ask for gold or land. She didn't sit on a throne. She simply whispered, "It is done. Now I can go home." Yes, she said that. After everything, she only wanted to return to her village, to her parents, to her animals, to her prayers. But the king said, "No, you must stay. France still needs you." And France did, because while the crown was on the king's head, the war was not over. Now came the turning point, the moment when the light began to darken. Joan, whose voice had always been clear, still heard the same divine message. Keep fighting. Drive the English out completely. Begin with Paris. But now the king, the same man who owed his crown to Joan, became slow, indecisive, afraid of more war. He had the crown. He wanted peace. But peace with the English meant betraying Joan's mission. Still, Joan was loyal. She gathered troops and began the attack on Paris. But the king sent little support. He gave her a weak army and told his commanders not to fight too hard. It was a political game, and Joan was walking into a trap. On September 8th, 1429, Joan led her troops toward the walls of Paris. She believed victory was near. But this time, it was different. The soldiers were hesitant. The spirit of unity was missing, and the king's support was silent. Joan fought bravely, even after being shot in the thigh by a crossbow. She refused to leave the battlefield, but her men were forced to retreat. Paris remained in enemy hands, and for the first time, Joan had failed. After Paris, everything began to change. The king stopped listening. He avoided her. He listened to politicians, not voices from heaven. Joan, once seen as a messenger of God, was now just a problem to the royal court. But she didn't give up. She kept fighting, moving to small towns, helping wherever she could. But now her army was smaller, supplies were limited, and her enemies were closing in. In early 1430, Joan heard that the city of Compiègne was under threat. She rushed there with what troops she had. But this time, the enemy was ready. The English and their allies, the Burgundians, surrounded the city. Joan led a charge to defend it. But during the retreat, the gates of the city were closed too early. She was trapped outside, alone, surrounded, on horseback. She fought with everything she had, but there were too many. And finally, Joan of Arc was captured. The people who caught her were not English. They were French. The Burgundians, allies of the English. Joan was their prize. They didn't treat her like a soldier. They treated her like a witch, a liar, a threat. They locked her in a cold tower, tied her hands, chained her feet, and waited. They offered to sell her to the English for a large sum of money. The king, the same man whose crown she had secured, did not pay to save her. He said nothing. Joan was left alone. Chapter 3. The trial that tried to break her soul. Joan was now far away from the battlefield. No horses, no banner, no army, only stone walls, iron chains, and silence. She was taken to the city of Rouen, which was controlled by the English. This was not an accident. This was planned. The English knew something very important. They could not defeat Joan's story with swords. So they decided to destroy her name. If they could prove she was evil, then her victories would mean nothing. Her faith would become a lie. Her courage would be called madness. So they prepared a trial. But this was not a fair trial. This was a trap from the beginning. Joan was locked inside a dark prison tower. Her feet were chained. sometimes her hands too. English soldiers guarded her day and night. She was not treated like a prisoner of war. She was treated like a criminal. She was only 19 years old. No family, no friends, no lawyer, no support from the king she had crowned. But still, she did not cry. At night, when the guards slept, Joan prayed quietly. She asked God only one thing: let me speak the truth, no matter what happens. The trial began in early 1431. More than 70 churchmen were present. Most of them were loyal to the English. They were educated, powerful, clever. Joan was alone. They asked her questions for hours every day. Not simple questions, dangerous ones. They wanted to trick her into saying something wrong. If she said God spoke to her, they would call her a liar. If she said God did not speak, they would call her a fraud. But Joan answered with a calm strength that shocked everyone. They asked, "Do you know if you are in God's grace?" This was a trap. If she said yes, they would say she was proud and sinful. If she said no, they would say she was not sent by God. Joan paused, then answered, "If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may God keep me there." The room fell silent. A teenage girl, outsmarting trained theologians. Again and again she did this. They asked about her voices. She spoke honestly. They asked why she wore men's clothes. She said it was for protection, and because God allowed it. They asked her to submit completely to the church court. She said, "I trust God first." That sentence made them angry. The judges began to lose control. Joan was too strong, too clear, too fearless. So they changed their strategy. They threatened her. They showed her torture tools. They said, "If you don't confess, we will torture you." Joan looked at them and said, "Even if you tear me apart, I will not say anything other than what I have said." She was not shouting. She was not emotional. She was steady. That scared them more than anger ever could. Days passed. Weeks passed. Joan became tired, sick, weak. One day they brought her a paper. They said, "Sign this, and you will live." The paper said she was lying, that her voices were false, that she was wrong. Joan could not read. She was afraid. They told her lies about what the paper said, surrounded by enemies, exhausted, alone. She signed. For a short moment, the court smiled. They had broken her. Or so they thought. After signing, Joan was sent back to prison. But something inside her changed. She realized what they had done. She realized the truth. Living without truth was worse than dying with it. When the judges returned and asked her again about her voices, she said, "What I said before was true. God did speak to me. I was afraid, but I was wrong to deny it." The court was furious. Now they had their excuse. They called her a relapsed heretic, the worst kind. That meant only one punishment: death. Joan was told she would be burned alive. She did not scream. She did not beg. She asked only one thing: "Please, give me a cross." A small wooden cross was made for her. She held it tightly. They tied her to a tall post in the marketplace. Wood was placed around her feet. Crowds gathered. Some people cried. Some prayed. Some watched in silence. As the fire was lit, Joan shouted one name again and again: "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus." She looked up and said, "My voices were from God. Everything I did was for Him." Smoke rose, flames grew, and the voice that once led armies fell silent. She was 19 years old. When it was over, the English say they burned her ashes again and threw them into the river. They were afraid that even her remains would become a symbol. But it was too late. They had killed her body, but they had made her immortal. Chapter 4. The Girl Who Died, and then changed the world. When the flames turned Joan's body into ashes, the English thought it was over. They believed the fire had erased her faith, erased her victories, erased her name. But they didn't understand something very important. You can burn a body, but you cannot burn a truth. You cannot destroy a spirit that came from God. And you can never silence a girl who believed, because even as the smoke rose in the sky, something invisible began to rise with it. Her legacy. After her death in 1431, France remained divided. The war between the French and the English continued. The people who had followed Joan, the villagers, the farmers, the young soldiers, they cried in secret. They knew the truth. They had seen her power with their own eyes. They had marched behind her. They had watched her fall. But at the royal court, there was silence. Charles VII, the king whom Joan had crowned, said nothing. He had allowed her to die. He had abandoned her in her darkest hour. And now, he wore the crown that her faith had helped him earn. But time is a strange thing. It can cover lies for a while, but not forever. Years passed. Cities changed hands. Generals came and went. But Joan's name never disappeared. People still whispered her story. She led armies at 17. She faced 100 men and never ran. She heard voices from heaven. She died with God's name on her lips. And those whispers began to grow louder. By 1453, more than 20 years after Joan's death, the war finally ended. France had won. The English were pushed out. And Charles VII was now the strong king of a free nation. But there was a problem. People remembered who had helped him reach that throne. They remembered Joan. And they remembered how he let her die. The pressure grew. Finally, in 1455, Charles ordered a new investigation. He wanted the world to believe he had nothing to do with her death. So he allowed the church to review the trial of Joan of Arc. And when the investigation began, the truth exploded like a thunderstorm. More than 100 witnesses came forward. Old soldiers, priests, villagers, even nobles. And what they said was powerful. She was pure. She was chosen. She never lied. Her voices were real. The trial was a setup. She died because people were afraid of her strength. The judges who had sentenced her were exposed as corrupt. They had lied. They had twisted her words. They had murdered her under the name of religion. Not to protect faith, but to protect power. In 1456, after months of hearing testimony and studying the evidence, the court announced the truth. Joan of Arc was innocent. Her trial was illegal. Her sentence was false. Her death was unjust. And in that moment, 25 years after her execution, Joan was no longer seen as a criminal. She was declared a martyr. Her name was cleared. But even that wasn't enough to describe what she truly meant. Because by now, Joan had become more than a girl, more than a warrior, more than a national hero. She had become a symbol of divine courage. Over the centuries, Joan's name spread far beyond France. Artists painted her. Poets wrote about her. Writers studied her life. Statues were built in her honor, not just in Europe, but all over the world. Books called her the girl who saved a nation, the spirit of France, the bravest soul who ever lived. Even soldiers in later wars said her name for courage. And slowly, something even bigger happened. In the Catholic Church, becoming a saint is not easy. It takes decades of research, miracles, and approval. But Joan's life had all the signs. She had heard divine voices. She had lived with total purity. She had died for her faith. Her name inspired millions. In 1909, the Church declared her blessed. In 1920, nearly 500 years after her death, Joan of Arc was officially declared a saint. She became Saint Joan of Arc, and her feast day was set, May 30th, the day she died. Even now, in our modern world, Joan of Arc remains a legend. Why? Because her story speaks to something deep inside all of us. She reminds us that you don't need power to be strong. You don't need education to speak truth. You don't need permission to follow your purpose. You don't need to be loud to be heard by heaven. She was a teenager, a farm girl, a poor child who listened to a voice that no one else heard. And she followed it, even to death. Not because she wanted glory, not because she wanted fame, but because she believed. When God gives you a mission, you do not say no. Today, you can visit places in France where Joan walked. You can see the stones where she prayed, the castles where she stood before kings, the town square where she was burned. But her real monument is not made of stone. It is the millions of hearts who still whisper her name. Every time someone is afraid to speak the truth, Joan's courage gives them strength. Every time someone is told, "You can't do this," her life becomes a voice that says, "Yes, you can." Every time someone feels small, unseen, unimportant, Joan's story reminds them, one voice, one heart, one girl that can change the world. She lived only 19 years, but her legacy is eternal. She was not a queen, not a scholar, not a warrior by training. She was simply Joan, a girl who heard something no one else did, and believed it with all her soul. My friend, you have now heard the full, powerful, emotional, and inspiring life of Saint Joan of Arc. May her story give you the courage to fight for your own dreams, to listen to your inner voice, to follow your mission, even when the world doubts you. Because like Joan, you were not born to stay silent. You were born to make a difference. Powerful lessons from the life of Joan of Arc. 1. Believe in your inner voice, even if no one else does. Joan heard voices from God at age 13. No one else heard them. People laughed, they doubted, they mocked her. But she trusted what she knew in her heart. Lesson: you don't need the world to believe in your dreams. You just need the courage to believe in yourself. 2. Your background does not define your future. Joan was born in a poor village. She had no money, no education, and no royal blood, but she changed the history of a nation. Lesson: you are not limited by where you were born or how you started. You are defined by your vision, your action, and your faith. 3. Courage means acting, even when you're afraid. She was only 17 when she rode into battle. She had never fought before. She faced swords, arrows, and war. But still, she said, "I am not afraid. God is with me." Lesson: courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to move forward despite it. 4. Faith can be more powerful than an army. Joan didn't win with weapons. She won with belief. Her faith was so strong it moved kings, soldiers, and thousands of people. Lesson: when your purpose is pure, your belief becomes your greatest weapon. 5. Even when the world betrays you, stay loyal to your mission. The king she helped abandoned her. The court that praised her condemned her. But Joan never turned bitter. She stayed loyal to her truth. Lesson: never tie your identity to other people's approval. Your purpose is yours alone, and no one can take that away from you. 6. One life, lived honestly, can change everything. Joan died at 19, but centuries later, her name still shines like gold. She lived simply but truthfully, and that made her immortal. Lesson: you don't need to live forever. You just need to live with truth, courage, and meaning, and the world will never forget you. 7. They can burn your body, but not your spirit. Joan was burned alive, but her voice still speaks through history. Her spirit still lives in books, hearts, churches, and dreams. Lesson: your soul is stronger than fire. If you stand for truth, even in your silence, you will roar. 8. You don't need to be great to start, but you must start to become great. Joan didn't wait for permission. She didn't wait to learn more or be older or be qualified. She acted. Lesson: start with what you have. Start where you are. Start now, and let your greatness grow along the journey. 9. You were not born to stay silent. Joan didn't remain hidden in her village. She knew her voice had value. She used it. Lesson: speak up. Take action. You were not created to stay invisible. You were born to make a difference. 10. Truth is stronger than time. They tried to erase her, but 500 years later, the truth returned and crowned her a saint. Lesson: the truth always wins. It may take time, but truth outlives lies, fear, and even death. My amazing friend, you have now walked through the full, powerful, emotional, and life-changing journey of Joan of Arc, a girl who didn't have power, but became one of the most powerful names in history. So what about you? You don't need to be famous. You don't need to be rich. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to believe in your voice, in your purpose, in your mission. Joan didn't know everything. She didn't have all the answers, but she took the first step. And that first step changed a kingdom. So today, I invite you to take your first step. Speak your truth. Stand with courage. Learn. Grow. Rise. Whether you're learning English, building your dream, or fighting your own silent battle. Remember what Joan showed us. One person, with unshakable belief, can change the world. And maybe that one person is you.